Hello, welcome to the next episode in Making Terraria in Python. Today we're going to be making a graphical user interface for our inventory. In the last episode we left off, we had this little scene, and whenever we click, we display a little terminal view of our inventory. Our challenge for this episode is to bring this terminal view into an actual proper visual inventory like we all know it. So let's get into it. So the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to give our inventory access to our textures. And for this, we're going to have to go to the scene. This is where we're creating our inventory object, and we're going to have to pass it our textures. So here we have our atlas textures. We're going to simply pass it here. So self.atlas textures. And now we go to our inventory.py and add this argument into our constructor. So we're going to do textures, and then we're going to simply assign it here. So self.textures equals textures. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to use this to draw in our draw method. So right now we have a little blank draw method, but we're going to fill this with some stuff. So the first thing we have to do is we have to draw the canvas that the inventory is going to be on. And this is just a little background. There's always going to be a little background in your inventory. So it's going to be a little just solid colored background. And the size of this is going to fit 5 blocks, and I like to have a little bit of padding with them. So I have a little diagram here of this, and this only has 4, but just imagine 5. We have each of these is 1 tile size wide of the block, and then there is half a tile size of spacing on each side. And so this means the total tile size for this slot is 64 pixels, given that our tile size is 32 pixels. So if we have 5 slots, then the total size of this will equal whatever that equals. But we don't actually have to know that, because we can just use some simple math to achieve this. So let's go ahead and draw our background. So we'll do pygame.draw.rect. This is going to take in the screen argument, so self.screen. It's going to take in the color. I'm going to do gray, and then it's going to take in the rect value. So we can do pygame.rect. And this takes in 4 arguments. The first 2 are the x and y coordinates, and then the next 2 are the width and the height. So for the x and the y, we're simply going to put it at 0, 0. And then for the width, we will do in parentheses, we'll do tile size times 2, and then we'll multiply it by, and then we want to multiply it by the length of self.slots, just in case we decide on making our inventory larger in the future. So now what we're going to do is for the height, we will simply do tile size times 2. And now let's go ahead and check in our scene that we are actually calling the draw method inside of our scene. I believe we are. Yes, self.inventory.draw. So we can go to main and press run. And now you can see that we have this little gray square here. This is going to be the canvas for our inventory. So now let's display all of our blocks. Go back to the inventory.py, go to draw, and what we're going to do here is we're going to loop over all of the slots inside of our inventory. So for this, we're going to make a range for loop. So for I in range, and then inside of the range, we're going to do the length of self.slots. And then what we're going to do here is we will just do one check. So we'll do this. We'll scroll down to if self.slots at I.name does not equal default, because remember, default means that the slot is empty, then we will actually draw the slot. Now, before we do this, we have to create a little bit of an offset. Let's go back to that diagram. There is a little bit of padding. If you've ever worked with web development, there's a little bit of internal padding on each slot. The padding of each slot is 16, which is half of the tile size. And then the little intervals here, we are incrementing by 64 per block. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create an initial X offset of 16 and an initial Y offset of 16. And this will just allow us to have a little bit of padding on our blocks. So here we're going to go down here, and we're going to create an X offset variable. X offset equals tile size divided by 2, and then the Y offset here is equal to tile size divided by 2. Now what we'll do here is we will draw the textures, and this is where the textures that we pass comes into play. So we'll do self.screen.blit, and the first argument is the texture, so self.textures, and then this the key value. We're going to do self.slots at I.name. So we are taking the slot at the index position. So for example, if we were at slot 1, the name of it would be grass. So we would display the grass texture. Now we need the position. And for the position, it's going to be a tuple. And then the first argument inside of the tuple is going to be X offset plus, and then we need in parentheses, we will do tile size times 2. And then this outside of the parentheses, we will multiply it by I. And this is basically moving over 64 blocks or 64 pixels per slot. And the next argument is going to be the y, so it's going to be y offset, and that's it because we're not doing any sort of incrementing with our y offset. So now let's go ahead and go back to the main and run it. And you'll see that we have our blocks displayed where they are inside of the inventory. Because if we click here, we'll see that the slot 0 is empty, so we don't have anything. The slot 1 has grass, so we see grass and dirt and stone, etc., etc. So now let's get some highlighting going on. We want to actually see which slot we are currently on. So let's go to our inventory here, and let's just add another check here instead of our range. So we'll do if I equals, and then remember we have an active slot variable, and this active slot is simply an integer representation of the current slot that we are in. So we'll say if I equals self.activeSlot, then we will draw a little highlight. So we're going to do pygame.draw.rect. This takes in the screen as the first argument, so self.screen. Then the color, I'm going to do white. And then for the rect, I'll do pygame.rect. And then for the x and y, the x does not have an offset because we want the highlight to highlight the entire slot. So instead, the y is simply going to be tile size times 2, or not times 2. It's going to be I times, and then we're going to put in parentheses here tile size times 2, and then for the y we are going to do simply 0, and then for the width we will do tile size times 2, and then for the height we will do tile size times 2, and then that should be good. So we go back to our main and run it, and we should see that we now have a slot. And if we use the arrow keys to move around, you can see that our slot is working pretty fine here. That's good. So now let's go back to our inventory here, and let's add one more little optional aesthetic. So there's no borders on our slots, which I personally like a little bit of borders. So let's go ahead and draw some borders onto our slots. So for this, I'm going to go after the highlight because we want the border of each slot to go on top of the highlight. And we're going to simply draw some borders. So we will do pygame.draw.rect, send in the screen. And then for the color, I'm going to do black. And then for the rect, we'll do pygame.rect. And then this takes in the x, y, width, and height. So for the x, it's simply going to be the exact same thing as this, as the one we just made. So just copy and paste it. But at the end, we're going to add one more argument to our pygame.draw.rect, which is a width. And I'm going to do a width of 2. And what you'll see is if we run this, we now have some slots. Now there is an aesthetic issue with this. As you can see that the slots in between each block are a little bit wider. Let me actually enhance my view here so you can see this. The slot, the in between here is a little bit wider than the edges. And this is because this slot's border is rubbing up against this one. So it's 2 + 2 = 4. This is 4 wide. These are only 2 wide. And so the way we can fix this is by simply creating a little border around our slots. So we'll go to inventory here, and we will just take this original canvas that we're drawing here, go to the bottom because we want this to be the last thing drawn, paste it here, and then change this to black, and then go comma, and we want to make this 4 wide. So this is drawing a border around all of our slots that is 4 wide. Go to main, run it, and you'll see that now our borders are the same width on all sides. So it looks pretty clean. One last thing we can add here is we can add the quantity for each block. So let's go to here and let's get this started. Let's go back to the inventory, click here, inventory. And what we want to do is we want to only display the text when we actually have text here. So for this, we're going to create a font, and I believe I already did by accident. Let's go ahead and create a font here. So I have this little section called fonts. I'm going to do self.font equals pygame.font. This is creating a font object, and the first argument is the file argument, and this could be for any sort of font you want. A TTF file with a font would work. However, I'm just going to use the none. None means that you're just using the default font. And then for the size, I'm going to do 30. And this is just creating the font that we're going to be using. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go below where we are drawing our textures, making sure that we're within this if statement of if it does not equal default, because we don't want to display text for an empty slot. There's just no point of displaying a quantity of 0. What we'll do is we'll simply do self, and then I'm going to call this amount text. It's a bad name, but equals self.font.render. And this is going to actually render the font or the text that we want as a surface. The first argument is going to be a string. So str parentheses to convert this to a string. And then inside of the parentheses, we'll do self.slots at index dot, and then we want dot quantity. And then for the next argument, it's going to be anti-aliasing. So I'm going to do true. The color, I'm going to do black. And that's all we need to do. So this is actually going to create a surface. And now this amount text is a surface. We're going to use the surface and simply draw it onto our screen. So I'm going to do self.screen.blit, and then here I'm going to do self.amount text. And for the position, I'm going to test out just putting the position of our textures and just copying and pasting it below here. Let's see where that ends up. So if we run this, you can see that the number shows up in the top left corner of our blocks here. And this is because when we draw, we are addressing the top left corner. So this makes sense. But I actually want it to be in the top left corner of our slot with just a little bit of padding. Let's go to the inventory here and let's change this a little bit. So what we want to do is we want to actually remove the X offset, and then we want to remove the Y offset, and I'm going to add a bit of padding. So I'm just going to add a pixel padding of 5, and then the Y is going to have a pixel padding of 5. And if we go to main and we run it, you should see that now it is in the top left corner of our inventory. So that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and make sure this works. So if we place our blocks, you'll see that the blocks quantity decrements, and when we reach 0, it automatically removes it. We can go to the next one and do the same thing. Same deal here. Pretty nice. And whenever we pick up a block, it snaps to the correct spot in our slots, and we can go over to it and we can place some blocks. So it's looking like our inventory is working perfectly fine. So that's pretty much it for this tutorial. Hope you enjoyed. We will get into having an expanded inventory when you press E or escape. But for right now, that's a little bit too much for one tutorial. So hopefully this is good for now. So if you have any questions, make sure to join my Discord. I'll be answering questions there. And if you'd like to support me, consider checking out my Patreon. So thank you very much for watching. Have a good day. See ya.